I said, this year we're downscaling quite a bit because we cannot have any volunteers. And usually I also get to hire a lead, but with me doing it completely by myself with the help of my team, when I'm able to call on them to help, it's going to be difficult for me to continue, with the process alone and also do the other duties. But we're still going to do it, and we're doing it to basically do more of a demonstration. So the people that are following along with us at home can kind of use the videos that we create as a reference point to know what to do next for their own process at home. So I have been doing a sugar season with the community with my department of language and culture at the Pokagon Band for the past 7 years. I believe this is my fourth season of actually coordinating it. When I first started, I was completely new to the whole process. I really didn't know anything. And we basically ended up having some changes in our department, and all of a sudden they said, well, we have to do sugar bush, can you help with that? And I was like, what's a sugar bush? So I had to basically start from scratch and figure it out and rely on talking to people in the community that were familiar with it, and people and elders to learn the stories, and basically just start from the ground up and watch and learn. So over the course of those 7 years, I can say that one thing that is always true is that I never lose my fascination with the fact that all you have to do is tap these trees and boil down this watery substance that comes out, and then you're left with this beautiful golden, delicious, sweet, sugary syrup. I think it's pretty amazing to think that that comes pretty much from nature, and you have to add nothing to it, and then you have this delicious sweet syrup that just comes so naturally. So it's never any less fascinating to me, no matter how many seasons I participate. So I'm going to start from the beginning, basically the beginning of the season. And I don't know how many people on the call are familiar with the, sugaring process. So I'll kind of go over a little bit of the basics. I know this picture is a little bit blurry, but I can explain it. Identifying the maple trees is probably one of the most difficult parts of it if you didn't do it when there was still leaves on the trees. Honestly, even for myself, going out and identifying maple trees after the leaves are all gone, it's still difficult. For me, it's a little bit easier because I can go out and go to the trees that I know were tapped in the previous years, and I know where the tap holes are. So that's also a way to identify them. And then, of course, here it talks about the bark of the tree being kind of a light, like a gray, flaky, it says it refers to it as like a frosted flake looking bark. If you can, sometimes the leaves hang on there. So if you're lucky, you'll be able to spot a few maple leaves that didn't get blown off from the fall or the winter. But the main thing that we've always done is go out in the fall when you can still see if the tree's healthy, even before the leaves really start to turn. And we always go out and we mark the trees with, something that doesn't harm the tree. So we don't usually nail anything into it, but we normally go out and we mark it with a piece of yarn or something that we can easily go out and identify which trees we want to tap. We know it's not going to blow off over the winter, so that when it's time to tap those trees, those markings are still out there. That's probably the best advice that I can give when it comes to marking those trees, is to get it done in the fall or in the summer so that you can see if that tree is healthy and you can be sure that it's an actual maple tree. You also want to make sure that the trees that you're going to tap are at least 10 to 12 inches in diameter, and any bigger than that, you can put more than one tap in it most of the time, and it will be, just fine. Sometimes you'll notice that at the beginning of the season, one tap will give you a lot more sap than the other, and then it switches it up towards the end. Sometimes they both are givers, but either way, those are some of the basics that we follow, and that's just, it's something that you can hear from anyone who's tapped trees, and even according to the guidelines that our own Pokagon DNR set forth to make sure that we're keeping our trees healthy while we're doing this. So a little bit about the science behind it all. For people who aren't usually sugaring or have done this process before, one of the things that you're waiting for is you want there to be a decent hard freeze. So we were really lucky that we had this cold weather come up over these past few weeks, because before that we really didn't have much of a winter. So having that nice hard freeze kind of helped us along quite a bit, because when it gets that cold, the trees are, to protect themselves, they absorb the water and pull it up into the trees, and it has the chance to freeze inside those trees. So what that's doing is, while that water is in there, it's absorbing all the sap that has been created inside the trees and all the sugar. So then once it warms up and we have those above freezing temperatures during the day and below freezing temperatures at night, we are able to collect the sap, because once that temperature drops, the sap that has kind of attached itself to all the water that the tree absorbed through the roots starts to come down, through, of course, gravity and just the pressure from outside changing with the temperature change. So that's when you're able to tap and collect that sap from the tree. What you are looking for is at the beginning of the season, because you've had a nice hard freeze, a lot of times that will be the highest sugar content that you get, because it's been able to sit inside the tree and collect all of that sap and all of that sugar for the whole time that the tree had frozen and it was sitting in there. So you'll have a higher sugar content then of course every night the tree will do the same process. When it gets below freezing, it will pull up all the water from the roots, and then it will give you the chance, when it gets above freezing above freezing temperatures the next day, to do it again. So that's why through the season you'll notice that the color of the syrup changes once you're cooking it, because you have to cook it a little bit longer when there's less sugar content to boil the water out of it. So what you're looking for ideally, as I said, is there to be long hard freeze to start, and then you want the temperatures to go above freezing during the day and then back below freezing at night. For us, our calendar, for like the Potawatomi calendar, we don't have months that you would have, like January, February, March. Our Potawatomi calendar that we would go by is 13 full moons in the year. So those moons have different names, and we're able to the names of the moons kind of tell you what you're supposed to be doing during that time of year. We have a hunting moon that's in the fall, so that's supposed to be hunting season. That's when the deer are in rut, things like that. Then we also have our maple sugar moon, which is in April, but that makes sense because I know if you go up north in Michigan, they tap trees much later than we do. But also, obviously the climate has changed through the time. So there was probably a time when maybe we had longer winters and we weren't able to start getting those temperatures to get to where we need them to be until closer to April. Right now for us, we're typically pulling taps by the end of March, or if we're lucky, the beginning of April. But that maple sugar moon for us is in April. So that's when our typical seasons would be. So that will lead me into this next slide. This is just some information, very general information. This isn't Potawatomi history type of stuff, but what we're looking at here is just a slide that explains the things that you might need. And it says right here that our normal sugaring season around here is from late February through early April. I have had years where I was able to tap early on and tap trees in January, or late January, early February. It just depends. It's really all about when that hard freeze happens and when those warm days start. Typically when we've tapped trees in January, we end up having a really hard freeze after that, to where we've tapped too early, and then sometimes once the weather warms back up, you don't get a whole lot of time with the good sap flow after that, because you tapped so early. So sometimes people will say it's always better to wait, but then there's times when you get nervous, because if you wait too long, you could miss your chance altogether. Some of the things that you would need if you were going to be doing it at home is a drill, a mallet to tap your spile in with, something to collect the sap. As I was just saying before, there's different grades of syrup. So you would have, the stuff that you get in the early season with the higher sugar content that's lighter is a higher grade. If you were going to sell it, then that's kind of more along the lines of what you would be looking at is the different grades. So, like I was saying, once you've identified your maple trees, then you're waiting for the weather to be right. Um, you would need all of those different supplies and have to have all of that ready. It's the same thing for us traditionally. We look for the weather, we watch the stars, we know the moons, and so then once that weather is right, then we traditionally would put down tobacco anytime that we harvest anything. Tobacco is an offering that we would give or prayers and of saying thank you for the sacrifice that that living thing is making for us to have what we need. So for these trees to allow us to tap into them and essentially, injure the tree in order to get this sap and pull the sap from the end, get our sugar and syrup. And we do the same thing when we harvest any plants or animals. We put our tobacco down, and so that's the first thing that we would do before we tap our trees. We also sometimes we will have ceremonies when we start our sap harvesting. There's been different times depending on who's able to do it. Sometimes we'll have someone sing a song. We need during this time of year, we consider this like the first gift of the year, the gift of spring, because there isn't really anything else that you can harvest at this time. So through the winter, um, it's such a harsh, cold winter living around here that our ancestors never, were able to tell you how old they are based on how many years they lived, because obviously they wouldn't have a date and a birth date that they celebrated on one specific day. But we tell you how old we are by telling you how many winters we've survived. So if that doesn't show you how harsh the winters were in this area, then I think that's a pretty good, gives you a good idea of how harsh winters were. That's how we were able to tell you how old we were, is that we've survived this many winters. So during the winter time, when Gokumiskinan, which is Mother Earth in our language, gets that blanket of snow, and we need that to happen so that the earth can rest up and prepare for all those things that she's going to provide for us in the spring and summer and throughout the rest of the year for our survival. So one of those things, and the very first thing that we get provided to us, is this maple syrup. So as much as people are probably sick of the snow, it's really important that we get it each year, because then that snow melts and is absorbed by the roots of all these trees, gives us our syrup, and helps supply us with what we need in order to plant our gardens and have other things that grow in the spring. There's certain stories that we can only tell when the snow is on the ground. It's kind of part of our culture, because during the wintertime there wasn't a whole lot of other things that we were able to do. As we said, the elements were harsh. There was a lot of storytelling going on, and the times for sharing those stories is typically in the winter months. So with that being said, I will share one of the stories about the reason why the maple syrup is so hard to come by for our people. Because it was said that a long time ago, when the world was new and things were a lot easier for our people, there was plenty of game, the weather was always good. The maple trees were filled with syrup, not sap, but syrup that you could just drink right out of the tree and it would be sweet already. So whenever anyone wanted to get that maple syrup from the trees, all they had to do was go break off a twig and collect it as it dripped out. So one of the stories, most of the stories that we tell, a lot of them are about Nana Bojo, who was kind of a trickster that would watch over and make sure that we were all doing what we were supposed to be doing as the original people. So one day Nana Bojo went walking around and thought that he should go and check on his Anishinaabe friends to make sure we were all doing well. Anishinaabe is what we refer to ourselves as, it translates to the original people. So he went to a village of Anishinaabe people, and there was no one around. And he was looking for everyone because they were supposed to be fishing and working in the fields and taking care of their crops, gathering berries, and just doing all the work that they needed to do to prepare for, for just living. And he couldn't find anyone. So he kept looking around, and then he eventually found everyone in a grove of maple trees right near their village. And they were all just laying around on their backs with their mouths open underneath the twigs, drinking up all the maple syrup. And Nana Bojo said, well, this isn't going to do. I don't want all the people to start getting lazy and forget about what they really need to do. And, this keeping living this way is not going to be good. So Nana Bojo went down to the river and he took with him a big basket that he made out of birch bark. And he filled it up with buckets of water over and over. And he went to the tops of all the maple trees and poured that water inside all of the trees so that it thinned out that syrup. And now that thick maple syrup no longer dripped out of the trees with the broken twigs at the end so people could just lay around and drink it. What came out was thin and watery, and you could barely even taste the sweetness. So Nana Bojo said, well, this is how it's going to be from now on. And no longer will the syrup drip from the maple trees, but now it'll be watery sap. So when people want to make maple syrup, they're going to have to gather many buckets of the sap in a birch basket just like mine. And they'll have to go gather wood to make fire so that they can heat the stones and drop them into these baskets so that they can boil this water on the heated stone so long that it'll take all the water out and make the little bit of maple syrup. And then he was thinking, the people will no longer end up staying lazy, and then they will appreciate the syrup that they have available to them because they have to work harder for it. And not only will it only drip from the trees, as a diluted watery substance, but it'll only come during this time of year when there isn't anything else that they should be doing. That way it won't keep people from hunting and fishing and working in the fields and gathering the things that they need to survive for the rest of the year. And that is why to this day, we still have to work so hard for our maple syrup because it's no longer something that we can take advantage of. So that was because of Nana Bojo's decision to make sure that we kept doing the things that we were supposed to be doing. So that's the Nana Bojo and the maple tree story. Okay, so now we will talk about harvesting and boiling. So there's a lot of things that might be different for Native Americans when it comes to the things that you would have to know when you come out to volunteer at sugar camp. And I know this is probably something that is going to catch people off guard when I say it offhand, but some of the things that you might hear if you ever try to go volunteer as a woman specifically is, you might hear people saying, well, are you on your moon time? And as I said, this is probably not the normal conversation that you would have anyplace else, but as women, when we're on our moon time, we are not around medicine and we consider this food medicine. You don't smudge, you don't go into ceremonies. It's considered a very sacred time for women because you're being purified on your own. Your body's able to do that for you. So women being the life givers it's a very powerful time. So it's one of those things that there's probably nowhere else that you're going to go where that's a normal question to be asked, but it's, not out of the ordinary. It's for people to be told like, well, you can't harvest during this time because your medicine is so strong within you as a woman at that time that you don't want to take from the medicine and the power that you have in this in nature and in those plants that we're using. So one of the other things is that this first gift of the year is very important for people to, a lot of times you'll see everyone go to the tree with a little cup and take a bit of the sap and drink some of it because that's supposed to be one of the best medicines that you can get to start your your spring out because you've been like dormant for so long over the winter and you need that medicine to kind of rejuvenate you and get you going for the spring. So as you can see in these photos, there is a picture of some of our kids. They come out from the school and they harvest the sap and they all get a huge kick out of being able to drink the sap. And we always remind them of the reason why it's not sweet because of Nana Bojo's discovery all those years ago when they realized that we were sitting there drinking out of it because it used to be syrup. You can see our evaporator in this next picture up here. So we do cook with a large scale evaporator. That one that we use takes at least 50 gallons of sap to fill the pan, accurately. If you don't have that much sap, you can cook it and use water to fill the back pans. If you've ever seen the way an evaporator is set up, you keep that fire going underneath. In the back pan, you want to stay at a high boil so that syrup is kind of the sap is getting prepared to move into the front where you can finish it into actual syrup. So it's kind of a tricky process because you have to pull the plugs to kind of flood that front pan with the sap. And you pull off the syrup that comes out of the front, and then you fill the pans back up with the sap that's been being, prepared in the backside of the evaporator. So that's what we do when we have our full scale, at least 150 trees tapped. But this year, I probably won't have the opportunity to start that because I'm going to do such a small scale compared to normal years. So, and then you can see tapping. We, of course, use a drill now because we have one. And so we're living traditionally in a modern world. So we're going to use the things that are available to us because they are just there to make things easier. And then at the end there, you can see this was our sugar lead a couple of years ago where we have a big copper kettle that we will do open fire boils and cook over the fire. And it's pretty delicious that way because you can taste that smoky flavor. You can always tell the difference between the syrup that was cooked over an open fire versus the syrup that had been cooked in the evaporator because that smoky flavor kind of adds to it. And I like both. I mean, I'm not really going to be picky when it comes to real maple syrup. I'll eat either one, but there definitely is a difference in that taste. So now we will talk about traditional sap collection and spouts and buckets. So some of the things that we would have used, and I've heard different ways that it may have been done. The trough that you see there, we have a couple of large versions of that, and it's kind of just like a dugout little trough. And the spiles or the spouts that you see with it would have been just kind of hand carved. I've also heard stories of that there was a good chance that they just kind of took a hatchet or something sharp and just kind of hacked into the tree, just into that, the layer that you need to in order to tap, and caught the sap that came out from that mark. But then these spiles, we've carved these before and used them in the tree, and they would have probably been, had to find a way to hand drill them or just kind of wedge them into a crack of the tree that you had cut into to direct the sap. And you can even see in the birch bark baskets that are down below in the bottom picture, you can see those little spouts with some of the frozen sap kind of hanging down there, just kind of waiting to get in there once it warms up. So we don't typically use those buckets anymore. Obviously, it's a lot more difficult. It would have been a lot more difficult for us on a larger scale to use those, but we still do use the traditional, troughs and things like that when it comes to making sugar. And it looks very similar to this one. So our traditional tools most likely would have just been the birch bark baskets to catch the sap. And we do have a couple of those. They kind of look like winnowing baskets for ricing, just a little bigger. And then of course the dugout style trough that you would have been able to collect in. So this is some images of us doing our filtering and bottling. So filtering is probably one of the most important parts of the process for us now. I'm positive that we did not focus on filtering traditionally because that was probably just not really that necessary and would have been difficult to do unless we just had, used some kind of a cloth or handmade cloth. But what we do now is when we pull off the evaporator, in the first picture, you can see a pull off right from that front pan of the evaporator. We have a big, thick filter that we take it from there, out of there from that first filter. The first time we filter, it's actually from the sap and pouring it into the evaporator. And then the next time is when it's coming off of the evaporator into the pan. And then once we take it in and we heat it up to the appropriate temperature to bottle it, I actually like to filter it one more time as it's going into the bottle in the little funnels that you can see there. I usually put a filter there also. To me, since we use the glass bottles, especially, you definitely don't want there to be any sediment or sugar sand or anything in there that you can see. So filtering is extremely important. Bottling is making sure that you can seal it properly. That syrup has such a long shelf life, and the only thing that you have to worry about is if you bottle it correctly, then the only thing that's going to happen is there may be some condensation that will come out of the syrup and collect on the top of it. If you don't go through and kind of tip those bottles or mason jars or whatever you use every few weeks, to make sure that that condensation that's left in there mixes back in, then you can develop a little bit of mold. I've always been told by people that mass produced syrup in this area that there is no harmful mold that grows on the syrup, that if it molds, that they will literally just, filter that mold out, scoop it off, reboil it and rebottle it. And they say that the shelf life is very long. So I just try to prevent that from happening because I have a smaller scale operation by turning all of my bottles to make sure that that doesn't have an opportunity to grow. Um, Thickness. One of the other things is a lot of people like to use a hydrometer to measure the thickness of the syrup before you bottle it. For me, the thickness isn't necessarily um, has to be measured by one of those tools. I think that, you can also judge really well by your eye. Of course, you can taste it. That's the preferred way, right? You just wait for it to cool off and taste it and see if it seems thick enough, or, pour it on a spoon and let it dry up for just a second. You will tell immediately if it's thick enough. But a lot of times you can use a hydrometer, and that comes with this little cup, and you have to drop it in there and it will kind of bob and tell you exactly how thick it is. And there's, certain things, if you are making it for commercial purposes to sell it, that you would be able to look up and see what the desired, density or thickness of it would be. I don't worry too much about that because, as I said, for us, it's more, it's for our community. And so we usually just kind of, judge by taste and texture, and you can hold your spoon up as you're stirring it and see the thickness of it when it's dripping off the spoon. So then the main thing is making sure that you don't turn it all into sugar, because then you won't have any syrup. All you'll have is a bunch of sugar. Speaking of sugar, that's the next thing we're going to talk about. So maple sugar for us was probably, as Anishinaabe people, the most common thing that we made with our maple sap or syrup, because anything that was easy to eat on the go, that kept for a long time, that didn't require any additional, cooking to eat, was the main things that we wanted to keep. So that's why our traditional food was a lot of dried fish, dried meats, berries, things that they could dry and, eat kind of on the go. And the same thing with this maple sugar. So it's very important to be able to have this food that you can kind of keep on you and eat without having to stop or cook or prepare anything. So you can see in these pictures, this was a bunch of people that I are in my department, and we got together to make sugar. That's usually one of the things that we like to do when we are able to all gather in one room close. Obviously, you can tell this is before COVID because none of us had on our masks. But basically what we do is we use the big wooden trough that you can see. That's very similar to the one that we would collect in. And the key for us is always, they said, put it out in the snow and make it sure that the bowl itself is really cold. I will put it in the refrigerator if we don't have a lot of snow, because that happens sometimes. And then you'll take your syrup and you boil it to the next, level temperature, so that it's getting the rest of the water out of it. You evaporate just enough to make it syrup, but then you can take more water out of it so that it will turn into sugar. And it'll basically start to bubble and boil, and it kind of looks like candy. And I actually like to use a candy thermometer to make sure that I'm getting, at the right temperature. And then once you start to lift up your spoon and you can see that it's really stringing off of there, it doesn't really just, drip like the syrup would, but it's just kind of like a toffee almost. Then you can pour it into one of the cold bowls. And once you have it done like that, and you continue to stir it vigorously, you just have to keep stirring it back and forth as fast as you can, and you will kind of start to see it clump up. And the picture that you can see at the top corner there, where there's still some in the wooden bowl, you can see that it's still some stuck to the edges of the bowl, but it kind of starts to clump, and it's just kind of amazing to watch it turn into sugar right before your eyes. And it's just stirring it and stirring it. And I mean, we had to keep switching who was stirring, because your arm will get extremely tired from trying to whip that thick syrup around until it starts to crumble like that. So once we get it to that point, you can see there's a black ash basket that we've actually had one of our citizens made. and he uses that to, well, his family makes it, and he uses it to sift the sugar out so that you can get the really nice, like granulated fine sugar. And then, of course, we keep the big pieces and we just call that candy because it just makes sense that you should just eat that, right? Because it's bigger than a regular sugar. So it's just easier to call it candy. And there's your snack. So we separate it like that. We keep the big pieces for candy. We bag the granulated stuff, and we use it for so many different things. Diabetes is really, really bad in our tribal communities, and it's most likely because our bodies weren't used to digesting that processed sugar. With this natural sugar is much easier for us to digest. I know people who had diabetes that were able to replace the processed sugars with maple sugar and eventually kind of wean themselves off of their medication because it's just so much easier for your body to process and digest. So we like to try to provide this to our community members and make sure that everybody has the ability to get a hold of it, and make sure that our elders hall, who provides lunch for our elder community members on a daily basis, has it so they can replace that sugar for their coffee and tea and things like that. I like to put it on oatmeal. We put it on ice cream. Like I said, we just eat it like candy because it's just good by itself. But maple sugar has many, many uses. And one of the main reasons why it was probably the most important, even more important than the syrup, is just because, as I said, it is something that you could eat and take with you on the go. And when we were moving around and traveling all the time and harvesting and out working, that was most important thing, was to be able to have something to sustain your energy while you're on the go. So I'm looking at these pictures of the sugar, and it's like I'm really excited to know that we're tapping trees tomorrow because it looks really good. And smell, if you know what it smells like, there's nothing like it. So this is some of the traditional tools that I guess we would use when it comes to the actual process. I already talked to you a little bit about the open fire cooking, but you can see that's one of our sugar leads out at Bendix Woods, where they do their maple sugar days. They actually called us when he was going to go out there and do a presentation for them. And they said, well, what do you want for your outdoor cooking? And I told them, well, we just need like a basic, setup. And they built us this elaborate, like nice little thing to hang our pots on. And it's really, really nice. So that is exactly what you would want to be able to have your, several pots over the fire cooking. Being able to boil and have different, everything cooking at different levels. That one is that big. You could have your dinner cooking and then have your maple syrup boiling right next to it. Those spoons, we actually do workshops with our citizens so that they can make their own sap stirring paddles and sugar spoons. So that those spoons are hand carved, and we have the ones that have the little pretty designs on the side came from an old Potawatomi design that they had found. One of our families had found in a museum or a picture somewhere that they kind of mimicked. So we're able to make these spoons, and then you kind of have your own family sap stirring spoon for sugar season. So you'll see people will come up and they'll have their spoons, and that's what they'll stir the evaporator with or stir the pot with. And then your sugar making spoon to kind of use in your bowl to stir and make your sugar with. So that's one of the things that we try to do, is get people out there while we're making syrup, because if you've ever done sugar season or participated in anyone else's, you know that there's always so much downtime. Like the boiling process can take so long that a lot of times you're just sitting there and cleaning up. So it's nice to be able to get the citizens out there and have everybody who wants to be present to do something else, so that when those other parts of the sugaring process happens, they're there and able to be a part of it and see it take place. And and then we always just hope that they get kind of bit by the maple sugar bug and decide to stick around and come back every year and bring their families out to participate. We do have a lot of families that participate. We have several people in our community that tap their own trees and make their own syrup. So it's not something that just the tribe does for the community. There's also several citizens that do it on their own as well. This is our finished product. So this was probably one of the best seasons that we had. It's just really beautiful color. We had the most, I think 40, 40 or 50 gallons. I can't even remember how much finished product we had, and several pounds of sugar. Um, Normally, it takes, on a good year at the beginning of the season, you could get anywhere between like 35, 45 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. Some years when it's the kind of rough season, you're going to have to get more like 60 to 70 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. So you kind of get this like attachment to this syrup because you've harvested thousands of gallons of sap, and then all you have is this little, bit of, 40 gallons of syrup. But it's hard to let go of it because you spent so much time and so much work putting into getting all this sap just to come up with this syrup. So Nana Bojo really taught us a lesson with that, diluting this sap down. And then the sugar, of course, like I had said, we have the bigger pieces that we kind of sell and give away as candy. And then we have the big bags that we have of granulated sugar. Typically, we try to just give our citizens as much as we can. And then after we've given people a couple of months to come in and pick up what they need, then we'll offer it to the community, the outside community, and sell it. For the bigger 12-ounce bottles are usually $15, and the 8-ounce bottles are 10. This year, we probably won't do a lot of that because we're only doing this for demonstration purposes. So I think that most of this will go right back into our community, for people to eat and enjoy however they can. So and normally we get these fancy bottles again this year because it's mostly for demonstration purposes. I'm going to be using the mason jars. There's nothing wrong with that. They're very easy and convenient. And we're really just hoping that during these winter months that more people will, kind of get into this and start thinking ahead to gardening, because during this time with the pandemic and everything that's happened, I feel like there's probably more focus on being able to know how to have your own food and be sustainable in that way. I couldn't tell you how many times I went to the grocery store at the beginning of the pandemic and we could not find fresh vegetables. We had to resort to frozen vegetables. We couldn't find meat. We couldn't find so many different things. So I'm hoping that people will really start to look ahead and plan on, harvesting things that they know grow out in the wild, and able to harvest like the local things. A lot of people don't realize how much stuff that people would consider weeds, in their yard that they're thinking are pesky that they're trying to get rid of, that is a really good food that's good for you. And being able to live off the land is just a survival skill that I think people really don't realize how important it is. Hunting, making this maple syrup and sugar, planting a garden, learning what you can eat and harvest off of your land, as all things that we're hoping to really kind of instill in people. And most of my, summer after the sugar season is going to focus on harvesting and, wild plants, wild edibles and things like that that we can find out in this land that we live in. So um, that's pretty much everything that I had as far as the story and the history. There was a couple of other things that I wanted to mention about new recipes, different things that you can use. This maple syrup is really versatile. It's really good on meat. So if you're thinking, why would I even tap trees and worry about making syrup? I'm not gonna eat that many pancakes. Well, you don't just have to put it on pancakes. There's so much that you can do with it. It's delicious on um ham, a glazed ham with that. A lot of the things, some of the traditional meals that you'll see with us is sweetmeat. There's a story that goes along with our sweetmeat dish too. And it's kind of an acquired taste, but once you've had it, you'd probably be surprised at how good it is. It's a mix of like either buffalo or deer or beef, and it's with some dried berries and wild rice and syrup. But the story is that there was a newlywed couple, and the man went out to go hunting with his friends, and this new wife was tasked with staying home and making food for them so that when they came back they had dinner. So she had this venison in this pot and she's cooking it over the fire, and all of a sudden she smells and realizes that it smells kind of burnt. So she looks in the pot and sees that it's, black and the bottom's all burnt, and she starts to panic because she's like, oh my goodness, I'm a new wife. Like, I failed as a wife already. I burnt the dinner. So she sees that this tree has a little twig that's broken, and it looks like there's some liquid kind of coming off of the twig. So she runs over and takes the pot and like fills it up with this liquid and goes and puts it back over the fire and starts scraping, trying to scrape all the burnt stuff off the bottom and like mixing it all up. And when she's looking at it, just thinking it's completely ruined, and she sees that the guys are coming back from hunting, so she runs and hides. And then the guys all come and they see that the dinner's done, so they start eating it and talking about how delicious this meat is and what did they do, what did she do. And so that's the story of how sweetmeat was found. That sap that they put into the meat and cooked it ended up being sweet. And so that's one of the dishes that we would typically have at feasts. We always feast our syrup at the end of the year. We always have a feast to celebrate the end of that season. We do the same thing with the end of the, fall, at the end of the summer when we're done harvesting everything in the fall. So, yeah, with the acorn squash with butternut squash, acorn squash, any kind of squash with syrup in it. Oatmeal, the sugar can be used for anything. So there's so many things to do. If you ever wanted to try it and you don't have to make a lot, I'm sure that you would never go back to store-bought syrup, and you would just either be busy every spring doing sugar bush on your own, or you created yourself a very expensive habit and you'd be spending a lot of money at the grocery store to purchase the real syrup, because it is definitely not cheap. So that's everything that I have. If you have any questions at all, I'm open for questions. I don't know if any came through in the chat or if anyone has any.
So if you have questions, you could put them in the chat right now. That's kind of how we have this set up. And we don't have any yet, Nicole, but I did actually have one maybe to kick this off, which was about the grades that you talked about earlier. That the better grade is the clearer one with, less, I don't know. It's just kind of interesting because it seemed to me that the ones that have more of the maple flavor were actually considered a lower grade, which was surprising to me because it would seem like the maple flavor is what people enjoy about maple syrup. How do they decide which grades are going to be, like what syrup's going to be good and what's not going to make?
Well, the way that they grade, and like I said, this is more of the commercial side of things. The way that it's graded on color is like the gold, light golden color, or the amber grade is usually earlier in the season. And the reason why that's lighter is because you don't have to boil it as long to get the water out of it because it's got a higher sugar content. So obviously, even, the later season, you're still boiling the water out of it. So it's going to be it tastes just as good. It might taste a little bit different because by boiling it longer, you're kind of burning those sugar molecules a little bit. So that's why it kind of looks darker towards later in the year. And sometimes nature will do strange things and switch it up on you. I've had seasons before where you start off with a really light syrup and then it'll get really dark and then all of a sudden it gets light again. So sometimes, the sugar contents will go up and down, and it just depends on the tree and where it is. And but yeah, it's usually the lighter the syrup, it's the less amount of time you had to cook it to get that water out. And so that's why it's kind of a lighter color.
I see.
And that, for whatever reason, if you talk to people like in Vermont and like the people that tap in thousands of trees and have like the tubing set up, then that's what they're going for, is that amber colored, like really light, clear syrup. And we usually can get that within the first couple of weeks. And then after that, it starts to get a little bit darker. But that's the stuff that costs a lot, is that really pretty stuff. There's a whole like black market for syrup. It's crazy. It's really strange. It's like this big business, and there's some stories. I've seen documentaries about how a few years ago there was so much that was made in Vermont that they were selling it for such cheap amounts by the barrel that it kind of messed up the whole market, because people were able to get it for so like inexpensive amounts for these big barrels because of the places that mass produced it. So the little guys that had these little sugar businesses in the local areas were struggling to sell theirs because they obviously couldn't sell it as cheap. But yeah, so there's a lot when it comes to the market that's out there for it. And then there's other, there's other trees that you can tap also. Like we would traditionally have tapped maple trees and birch trees, but we've been told that there's some things like the birch trees are prone to injury and disease once you tap into them. So our DNR office tells us to kind of be careful, and they would rather us not tap them just because they don't want them to be injured at all. And then the walnut season is actually later. So you can tap walnut trees. And I've never had it, but I've heard that walnut syrup is delicious. And that usually starts once our maple season is kind of ending. And you can also, once the sap starts to turn the way that you know that your sugar season is over, traditionally, we are told that once you hear the first thunders, that's when you pull your taps, because that means the season's over. So traditionally, that's what our stories tell us. I know that the way that you can tell by looking is if your sap starts to kind of look cloudy and it doesn't look like clear water anymore, then you know that it's starting to change. And if you're not sure, just put a little bit of it on a fire and cook it for a minute, and you'll be able to tell by the smell immediately, because sometimes it smells like burnt tires. Sometimes it smells like dirty socks. Like, it just does not smell good once it starts cooking and it's turned. So you can definitely tell by looking, and you can tell by smelling it. That's why I always try to make sure we cook our sap down every day, because then you get to see the changes and the grades, the different colors of the syrup as the season goes along. If you're mixing all of your sap that you collect in over the course of 2 or 3 days and trying to cook it all together, then you're not going to see that gradual change in color. So we try to cook ours down every day. On top of that, you can't let your sap sit out in above freezing temperatures for very long, because the bacteria will start to eat that sugar content away so fast that you'll just have some bitter, no good syrup left if you just leave it sit out. So cooking it down every day is the best results to get that nice variation in color, and to be able to get that like early season syrup versus the late season syrup and tell the differences. And and then at the end of the season, when it gets cloudy, I don't know how to do it. It's a very crazy long process, but you can actually ferment the sap and make a maple vinegar. I've tasted it that people have made, and it's really strange because it definitely has that vinegar taste, but it's great for like a salad, like a vinaigrette. But you can taste the maple. So it's such a weird thing, because the aftertaste is like vinegar, just a really strong vinegar. But the very first thing that you taste is that really sweet maple flavor. So, but if you have the patience for it, because that process is all like a fermenting, you have to take it. I know people that have put it in barrels and kind of sunk it in the cold like lake and let it sit under the water for like a year. I don't know the details. I just know that it's really good, and I would need someone to show me how to do it and figure out where I would keep it for that long to ferment it. But it's something that people can do once the season's over. So you can use the sap once it started to turn and is no longer good for syrup. But yeah, so the very maple sap can do a lot of different things. And it's a very important part of our community activities and a part of the sustainability for us and food sovereignty. So that's why this year, even though we can't have our community involved the way we normally do, we still thought it was extremely important to make sure that we did it, and to make sure that we were able to show people every step. So what we also did for our citizens is allow people to sign out taps and bag holders and bags, so that if they want to tap their trees at home, then they can come in and pick those up from me, and then hopefully follow along with my videos as I post them, so that if they get stuck or they're not sure what to do, they'll be able to use the videos that I post demonstrating each step to kind of help them out. And then I'm just going to keep my cell phone on in case anybody runs into a point where they're panicking and don't know what to do next with all the sap they've collected. So hopefully we get some more, newbies out there that are tapping trees at home too.
It's really interesting. I learned a lot watching this. So for those of you that are watching, if you have questions, on the bottom of your screen is a chat bubble. You click on that, and then it'll show you the chat screen. You can type your questions into the chat, and we can read them to Nicole, and she'll respond. If anyone wants to delve deeper into any of the things that she covered this evening. It's really interesting, Nicole.
Thank you.
We do have a few questions. I don't know if you can see them all also, Christine, or if it's just me.
Maybe go ahead, Michelle.
Okay. Well, there was just one comment. Someone wanted to thank you because they homeschool their children, and this week just happened to be maple syrup week
Oh yeah.
in their lessons, so it was perfect timing, and wanted to thank you. A couple people want to know if this is going to be made available later as a recording.
I think you did record it, so yeah, that's fine by me if that's something that you
Okay.
guys are able to do.
And then Grant says, I hope I'm going to pronounce this right. Boju, your language is very similar to Ojibwe of northern Minnesota. Any relation? Miigwech?
Miigwech, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Ojibwe, with the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwe, the Potawatomi, and the Odawa, our languages, we're all Algonquin speaking. So they say that our languages are so similar that if we all sat in the same room, even if we weren't absolutely like able to repeat it the way that the Odawa or Ojibwe said it, that we would be able to understand each other because they're so similar. So yes, there's a lot of things. I know I was raised around a lot of Ojibwe people, and I was taught that Wabozo was rabbit and Potawatomi when I started working for my tribe. But when I was a kid, I always pronounced it Waboose. And so just differences like that, like it's very similar, and you could probably understand each other even if you're not able to kind of repeat it that same way. But yes, very similar languages, and definitely a lot of relations going between the tribes.
Oh, and someone from the Friends of the Indiana Dunes just wanted everyone to know that they have a maple sugar cookbook filled with many recipes on how to use maple syrup. If you go to their website, you can contact them if you're interested in getting that. We have a
That's great.
question that is maple syrup produced in any other countries than the USA and Canada?
I'm not really sure. I honestly, since we can make it here, I never thought to check. It's one of those kind of things. But I mean, if they could grow maple trees, I guess it would really depend on the weather. I would assume that it could be done other places, but I don't know. That'd be something I'd have to look up. I'm not sure about that.
And
I'd
then,
always heard, Nicole, that it was not, that this was a very much a North American product. And I
Yeah.
remember reading somewhere too that people tried to bring them back to Europe or other countries. But again, it was that weather, that really special weather that we have of the
Hmm.
warm days, cold nights. And so they couldn't, they couldn't get the syrup, and they couldn't get the product the way it
Right.
is here.
Yeah, and having those seasons, having those all 4 seasons for us here is such an important part of it too, because once the trees start to pop buds, it's another way to know that your season's over, because once the buds start to pop, that means that all of that food that the tree was making, that you were, taking out with the water, and that sap is starting to go to nourish the tree to make those leaves and pop the buds. So your season's done once those buds start to pop.
um, uh, Bethany asked, she said that she lived in Quebec and they had a thing called, I'm not going to pronounce this right either, tire sur la neige, which is like boiling maple syrup on ice. It's really good. Is there anything similar to that treat in Potawatomi culture?
We will make like sugar snow. I don't know if this is the same thing, but a lot of times you can take your warm syrup and like string it across the snow, and then you roll it up like a taffy and
Oh,
eat it. So that's fun, but I'm not sure if it's the exact same thing. But yeah, we definitely will make sugar snow and kind of pour that syrup out there and just roll it up like a taffy.
uh, we have two sort of related question. How far in the tree does the tap go, and what do you do with the hole after the season?
Okay, so when you drill into the tree, you always want to make sure that you're not going in too deep. But one of the best ways to know that is if you're using a tap, that you purchase from the store or a spile, you're going to, I take my drill bit, and all the ones that I've ever used are 5/16 size drill bits. And when you look at your spile or your spot that you're going to be using, you can see exactly how far is meant to go in the tree, and then where is kind of a lip that sticks out to hold it from, going in too far or getting lost in the tree. So what I've always done is take a marker or a piece of duct tape, and I hold my drill bit up to the spile, and mark that drill bit so that I know I'm not going in any further than necessary. And for me, I feel like it's important to, when you drill in, to also like keep the drill going when you pull out so that all of that sawdust comes out, because if not, then that sap will mix with the sawdust and just make like a paste that clogs it right back up. So you don't have to go in very far. I would say 2 inches, maybe 3, depending on the spout that you use. And you always want to make sure that you're not drilling directly next to a hole that you just did the previous year. I've always been taught that you go 3 inches over and a few inches up or down from the one that you did the year before, because that is still healing. I know some people will go around and put mud to plug the holes, but I was told that you should just let them heal up naturally. I don't know which way is the best way, but I know the people that I have talked to that said, it's best just to leave it alone, because if you're plugging it with mud, you don't know what kind of, what you're putting in that tree, in that hole. And it's a wound that needs to heal. So you'll see the sap will still run out of the tree, and you're going to be like feeling like you're missing out because you can still see it running, but it's not, the season's over. That's not the sap that you can make into syrup anymore, but you'll still see it run out, and it does kind of heal itself up. And if you go around a tree and you look, you can see, where they've healed over the years, and you can still see the spot where the bark doesn't really quite grow back, but you can see that layer of the wood underneath is filling in and it's healing itself. So I used to think it was good to put that like a filler in there, but I don't. I just let them heal on their own now.
All right, looks like one more question. Can you make syrup from a black walnut sap?
I'm pretty sure that you can. I've always heard that it could be any walnut tree. The same with sugar maples. I know people that they don't only tap sugar maples, they'll tap like the other, types of maples, and you'll still get sweet syrup. It might taste a little bit different, but you'll still be able to make syrup out of it. And the walnut sap will be a little bit darker, and it definitely has a different taste, like a nutty taste, which you would probably expect. But I have heard that you can tap any kind of walnut trees, because they will all give you a sweeter, nutty tasting sap out of them.
And then that looks like it's it.
All right. Okay, well, miigwech for listening. Thank you for listening and joining in and giving me the opportunity to share some things with everyone.
Well, miigwech to you, Nicole, for doing this presentation and sharing all this knowledge with us. This has been really excellent. We're really sad at the park that we aren't able to host tours with everyone, which we would be, preparing to do now for the first 2 weekends of March. But we are going to be tapping our trees and keeping the tradition going. And this year, we're really going to try to make some syrup, and we're going to follow Mother Nature's schedule instead of our program schedule. So stay tuned, and we'll see what we're able to produce, because we think this is such an important tradition to carry on from all different kinds of cultures. So again, thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Christine and Michelle, for doing all the Zoom behind the scenes things. And thank you to everyone for participating with us, and happy spring. Hope to see you out there on the trails. Come out and visit us this spring. Take care.
Bamapi.